business and empowering women, and is currently leading the Women in Boards initiative in Uganda. She's also equally passionate about mentoring young adults, but Priscilla, and young adults and even ladies. And she's been married for over 36 years and a proud mother of 4 sons and 2 daughters in love. Friends, please join me in welcome Mrs. Priscilla Serukka. You're very welcome, Priscilla.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Some may be good afternoon or good morning, wherever you may be. It is indeed a privilege and honor to be sharing with you on unlocking appropriate corporate governance for Africa. And I chose to concentrate on ethical leadership. So when the previous speaker was speaking, I could see my notes going. But it also told me we were thinking about the same thing on what is important for for Africa today in order to have appropriate corporate governance, in order for us to manifest in this day and age. So I'll begin, first of all, by that is the outline of my sharing today. We'll define corporate governance. We'll also look at its importance in Africa. And also we'll look at something to do with the African principles of corporate governance. And then we'll look at ethical responsibilities of board members, ethical considerations for us as Christians in Africa who are going to manifest, and how to handle conflict of interest. So that is my outline today. So in defining corporate governance really is a process. And this process is aimed at directing institutions, controlling them, and holding them accountable. So for us in Africa, that's what it will mean. It will be a process. It's not a one-day thing which we'll achieve in one day. It has to be a process, and it's aimed at directing how institutions are led or governed, how they are controlled, and also holding them to be accountable. So corporate governance really has a lot to do with authority, how we are accountable, and also people who have been entrusted, who are good stewards. It's about leadership, giving leadership to institutions or in Africa, and also direction and control. Good corporate governance will always facilitate decision-making and also ensuring that we are responsible within an organization. We are able to accept when we are wrong and take responsibility. But it also involves balancing interests of different stakeholders. These stakeholders could be the owners of the organization. It could be the suppliers, the creditors, but also internal stakeholders like the staff, the employees of the organization. So it involves balancing interests of all those people, and also ensuring that the company meets its objectives, which means that the company or Africa, we need to have what are our objectives. And the leaders who will be giving leadership, their work is to ensure that Africa or institutions in Africa are meeting their objectives. So why is corporate governance important in Africa? And I'm thinking, why are we talking about it and thinking about it today? First of all, it strengthens institutions and also enables them to be accountable to the different stakeholders. But also, it helps us build transparent and very accountable institutions. And when institutions are transparent and accountable, we reduce on corruption, we reduce on mismanagement because we are being held accountable. It will also encourage good legal and regulatory reforms. I know in the previous discussion, somebody said, one way for Africa to manifest and have good corporate governance, we need to have good legal and regulatory reforms. Today, some of our legal reforms or our laws are not up to date or they're not appropriate. But good corporate governance will ensure there's good advocacy to have those appropriate legal and regulatory reforms. It also will boost investor confidence. And we all need investors for more capital. Investors will always go where they see there is good corporate governance. I remember one time I was the chair of an organization and we're looking for different investors or shareholders, but we're not yet breaking even. So we're told of some investors in France, and we asked that we could have a conversation with them. And we're able to tell them the different problems we had without hiding anything. So I was surprised. We were only 80% breaking even, but they were able to come in as investors. And afterwards, I told them I was a little surprised, and they said, well, we came in because you were accountable, you were transparent, and therefore we felt we could trust and work with you, even though you are not yet breaking even. So investors are more likely to engage with companies also that will demonstrate ethical leadership and they are transparent, but also good corporate governance will enhance mobilizing savings and being able to direct them into productive investments in Africa. And of course, we all know that the savings will give us the working capital we need for the different businesses that we have in Africa. Good corporate governance also will enhance organizational performance. This will always happen because the organization is being monitored. The organization has to report on how they are meeting their strategic goals. So because of that, and they're being monitored, they will have to improve performance. Good corporate governance also there is always a correlation, a strong correlation between good corporate governance and the performance of an organization. Wherever there is good corporate governance, an organization's performance will improve, and also vice versa is correct. Decision-making is always easier when there's good corporate governance, and also you will look into the risks of the organization, the strategy of the organization, and especially when we are in a very volatile environments and situations. It will promote sustainable development. That is, we'll look at the ESG, we'll look at the environment, the social and the governance issues of the businesses that we do. And again, we will look at those areas that will contribute to long-term sustainability and be able to mitigate risks and implement practices that will prevent fraud, financial misreporting, and a number of ethical breaches. So looking at the African principles of corporate governance, in Africa, or you could even say in Uganda or in Africa, we have been using principles that have been lent to us from the people who colonized us. For example, in Uganda, we lean a lot to South Africa, but also mostly to the UK corporate governance codes. That's where we draw our corporate governance. The challenge has been there's always minimal compliance, except for institutions which are highly regulated, like banks or financial institutions. But for many companies, there is minimal compliance. And the good news today is that there is an Africa governance framework that has been developed. This has been developed by the African Peer Review from the African Union. And the framework is more or less out. It has been shared in various countries. Even in Uganda, it was shared. And what is going to happen is that each country in Africa should align and come up with their own code of corporate governance. Already Ghana has led the way, and Ghana has its own code of corporate governance using this Africa governance framework. In Uganda, we haven't gone far, but at least it has been shared. There was a meeting with the Institute of Corporate Governance of Uganda where it was shared, and they said the Institute of Corporate Governance of Uganda is going to call different stakeholders and discuss and come up with a governance framework for Uganda. So yes, an appropriate governance framework is being worked on for Africa and for Uganda. And indeed, it is a paradigm shift. It is based on a mission and values, and also trying to cause us to be more competitive and ensure inclusive growth in Africa. It is going to be homegrown, meaning each African country is going to use these principles, this framework, and come up with its own code of corporate governance. And it's going to be, it's highly value-based, and we are going to be our own architects of our own corporate governance framework. We will no longer refer to the UK or corporate governance or the King Code from South Africa. These African principles address development of small and medium enterprises, which are the majority in Africa, and also family-owned businesses. So as I said, Ghana has already gone ahead, and hopefully Uganda, we are going to start on that chapter to adapt this code for ourselves. The African principles have been embedded in the values of the Ubuntu, calling for teamwork, and the Ujamaa, which was for Tanzania, and Harambee for Kenya. And these principles are championing inclusivity and sustainability, something which Professor also alluded for, that it is very important. It also promotes ethical leadership and fosters regional coherence so that it is relevant to us as a people, and we are not struggling to understand the UK code and so on. And it will also champion gender equality in business. And it is based on the comply or explain rule, meaning that either you comply, or if you're not able to comply, you explain why you are not able to comply. It also gives liberty to institutions whereby you are still a young organization. You don't have to start off with a board, because you are still learning the business. And if you are to have all these governance rules and procedures, you might choke creativity. So it can give you at least 5 years before you can start having a real active board. And you may also want to start with an advisory board before having an executive board. But today, I felt so much, yes, there are these codes for corporate governance and appropriate governance, but you know, all these codes are nothing when the people who are going to implement are not ethical. So I thought that I would concentrate a lot of my sharing today on ethical leadership for Africa. Once we have ethical leadership, it will be easy for us to have appropriate corporate governance. But if we have all these rules and procedures and frameworks, and we do not have ethical leadership, then it's all a waste of time. So I was very happy earlier on when it came out that the most important thing we need to look at as Africa is ethical leadership. So I was smiling that, okay, I was right in that aspect. So ethical leadership. I don't know, and I'm sure many of us, if you're a leader, we have all faced an ethical dilemma in our leadership roles. And I don't know what made it challenging. We don't have enough time for that interaction to hear from a number of you, but you could type it in the chat. But I'll share with you an ethical dilemma one time I faced. That time I was working as a regional director for Strome Foundation. I was overseeing 5 countries. And we were working in South Sudan, but now we had to move and have an office set up in South Sudan. So we're able to get a space where we could have an office, but at that time, a lot of things were broken down. So getting good space and where also staff can stay and reside and be safe was not easy. But the church there, equivalent to the Church of Uganda, gave us a space, but it was in a lot of disrepair. So on one of our budgets, we had a balance of 100,000 US dollars. And if we don't use that money, it was going to go back to the government of Norway that time. So we were able to get permission to use that money and look for a contractor. It was not easy getting contractors in South Sudan at that time. It was still those years when things were very shaky. So we get this contractor, and it happened to be a lady, and a Ugandan lady, and I was very excited about that. But we needed it to fit within the 100,000 US dollar that we had. So eventually I called this lady to my office. We're going to sign the agreement, but I also wanted to negotiate with her father. So her budget was going up to 120,000 US dollars, but we had 100,000 US dollars. So as we start negotiating on the different items, she then tells me, but you know, some of this money is for you. I said, what do you mean it's for me? Yeah, I factored in some handshake for you also. So I don't know why you are really trying to press me about reducing this budget. So I had to tell this lady, I'm sorry, madam, I'm a paid staff and I'm already being paid. So if you're factoring in anything for me, let's start removing all of that, and then we get the real budget. So we did go into that. It was an ethical dilemma for me, and we were time bad. We couldn't redo the whole process now of getting a new person to do the work for us. Otherwise, we would not have time to use this money before it expires. We are faced with many ethical dilemmas in our work as leaders, and we cannot avoid them, but how we handle them when they come our way is what will make us ethical people, or people will perceive us as ethical or not ethical. Sometimes we may serve on boards and you want to provide services for the company where you serve. For example, it could be there's a massive printing job that is going to be done, and you have a printing company, and you feign that you are reducing a little bit the price so that your company should be used. You want to gain from this company, which you have been brought to serve. So those are all ethical dilemmas, and how we navigate them is what will make us to be ethical leaders on this continent of Africa. Well, what is ethical leadership? Ethical leadership could be defined as it's a style of leadership. It's a style. It is grounded in values, and values of integrity. There's fairness. There's how you treat the people, the respect that you give to the people you work with or employ, and also accountability. Ethical leadership is not about only making profits, ensuring that the organization is profitable and achieving its goals, but it's about how you go about in getting profits and how beneficial you are to the broader community. So if we are to be ethical leaders, we need to be grounded in values of integrity, fairness, respect, and also doing things in a way that is morally sound and beneficial also to the broader community. Some key traits in ethical leadership. When we talk about ethical leadership, we are thinking about integrity. And integrity, we are trying to do what is right, even when it is hard, or unpopular. You may lose friends. Other people on the senior management team may not want to talk with you anymore. But also, we are consistent. When we say yes, we mean yes. When we say no, we mean no. And we are value-based in the way we do our work. Traits in ethical leadership also include fairness. We treat people equitably without bias. We don't have favoritism. But another trait is to do with respect. We value other people's perspectives. We listen to the rest of the people. We don't know everything. We acknowledge you don't know everything. So we listen to other people's perspectives and also foster mutual respect. Whether it is the lower down staff, we also respect them. Transparency, we communicate openly and also honestly. What we say is what we mean. You know, we are not those who say one thing, but we mean something different altogether. But what we say is what we mean, and also people perceive us that way. We also take responsibility for our actions and decisions. As human beings, we will always do some wrong actions or wrong decisions. But are we going to blame somebody else and say it is so and so? Or are we going to take responsibility even for those wrong decisions? Acknowledge our mistakes and also be able to learn from them. Will not be like the situation of Adam and Eve, where Adam said, you know, it is a wife you gave me, but we'll take responsibility even when our decisions do not come out right. So there are a number of principles for ethical leadership. The first one is to do with transparency and accountability in our decision making. Integrity and trust are cornerstones, and we shall build trust when people can trust what we say. They know our yes means yes, and our no means no. And also, another principle is to do with the cultural context for ethical leadership in East Africa. I already told you about the Ubuntu, or Ujamaa, or Harambe, and these philosophies prioritize people, prioritize solidarity, they prioritize also teamwork and service to others, service above self. Other principles of ethical leadership is declaring conflict of interest, especially when a decision could impair a board decision. I always tell people that it's not bad to declare conflict of interest. What is bad is if you know you have a conflict, you are conflicted, and then you keep quiet about it, and then a decision is being made and you're trying to push a decision in a certain direction just because it favors you, it favors your spouse, or your son is the one who owns this other company you want to be brought on board and to earn all this much money. You know, conflict of interest then becomes a conflict of interest and you have not declared it. When you declare it, of course, you don't participate in the decision making. So you don't try to push through your decision just because you want things to go in a certain way. And it's always even good to leave the room so that you do not see who did not favor my desire. Ethics is about also principles of what is right and wrong behavior, what society believes is right and wrong. And that may differ from community to community, what is perceived as right and wrong. So those are some of the principles of ethical leadership. Okay, I had a quote, but I don't know where it has disappeared to. But ethical dilemmas always will occur where the rules that are governing are vague. So if we want to be ethical leaders, we need to ensure that rules that govern are not vague. And also where there are no substitutes for critical thinking, and we are not able to take responsibility for our decisions. Ethical decision making also includes our intentions. What were your intentions and your final decision? But also, how do the people perceive you? Ethical leaders earn that label when they act morally as they carry out their duties and shape the ethical context of their organizations and societies. You know, people are always looking at us and perceiving us, whether we are ethical or not ethical. And there is a quote from Ernst & Young Forensic and Integrity Services. In business, trust and integrity are the pillars that uphold an organization's reputation and build confidence. Ignoring ethical values isn't just a lapse in judgment, it's a gamble with an organization's most valuable asset, and that is trust. When an organization is trusted, many people want to work with it. When it is not trusted, people will shun it. I hope I'm still good with time, Madame Gombia.
Yes, yes.
They're what we call ethical hotspots.
Mhm.
Sometimes we ignore this, but how we balance our work and family. Poor internal communications can also cause us not to be ethical, or poor leadership. Our work hours, sometimes we think we are working hard and delivering results and our workloads, but at times those are ethical hotspots for us. When we need to meet sales or budget or profits or goals, and then we really pressure the staff below us. Company politics, when we participate in the grapevine, personal financial worries, and we are trying to cut corners in order to make ends meet. Sometimes pressure from above, where superiors pressure subordinates to achieve results, even targets which are not realistic. And we are also responding to pressure from above, so we push on the pressure below on our subordinates. Being in ambiguous situations, no clear guidelines or ethical codes. There are times we rationalize and we end up doing bad things or what everyone else is doing so that we may fit into the group. And also, you know, just perceiving, wanting to be normal and accepted by the group. That can cause us also not to be people of ethical value. There was a survey that was done by Ernst & Young, the Ernst & Young Integrity Report, and it reveals a lot about what is happening in Africa. And it says, was just as in 2024, 38% of the respondents said they are prepared to behave unethically to improve their own career progression. That is how bad we are. And it was found that employee misconduct is directly influenced by the behaviors they observe from leaders. So if a leader is corrupt, those who are below will also start cutting corners. So they always say if you find a lot of corruption below in the lower staff, it is coming from the top. And it's always said the fish starts rotting from the top. So when the bottom is rotten, then the top must certainly be rotten. So 67% of board members also said in that survey they would behave unethically for their own benefit. So it's like they're on this board and they want to see, where do I gain by serving on this board? And it was also said that 65% of board members and 57% of the senior management feel under pressure not to report misconduct. So that's how bad we are from that integrity report by Ernst & Young. But some of the ethical responsibilities for us as leaders or board members: fiduciary duties, which means the duty of care, making decisions like you would if it was for your own institution. There's the duty of loyalty, ensuring that decisions you are thinking about, first of all, what is good for the organization, not what is good for me. And then the duty of obedience, whereby we are compliant with the laws, we are compliant with the memorandum and articles of the organization. Other ethical responsibilities are to do with our stakeholder responsibility. That is, how do we care about responsibilities of the owners, the shareholders, the internal staff, the creditors and suppliers? Are we paying them on time? Are we paying them as we promised? And are we looking into the sustainability of the organization in the long run? Looking at also the environment, that we are doing no harm. We also consider the community impact. How are we impacting the community in the decisions that we are making? Do we have relevant legal requirements for whether it is a company or an NGO? And also, are we managing conflicts, whether they are legal or reputational or financial? Those are some of our ethical responsibilities. Another quote, corporate integrity is about choosing ethical courage over convenient shortcuts, prioritizing what is right over what is profitable, and embodying the company's core values in every action, not just in the rhetoric, what people see, and then they think you are very ethical. So I want to bring it home to us as Christians in Africa who want to manifest. The Bible does talk a lot about ethical considerations like integrity and honesty. And Proverbs 11:3 tells us that the integrity of the upright guides them. And also in Proverbs 12:22, the Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in people who are trustworthy. James 5:12 tells us, let your yes be yes and your no be no. As leaders, we are called to be truthful, to uphold truthfulness, to uphold integrity and honesty. And this is in our reports. Do we falsify reports, make them look good so that people think good of what we are doing? How do we communicate with the different stakeholders? And also internally, in our internal operations, is there ambiguity? Is there truthfulness? Or are we always falsifying things in one way or another? As Christians, we are also called to be accountable and to be good stewards because we have been entrusted. Luke 16:10 tells us, if you are faithful in little things, you'll be faithful in large ones. But if you're dishonest in little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities. I remember this verse so much. It was my mantra when I was still as a little junior staff, being faithful in little things. There was a time we worked in an organization and, use of telephone and photocopying. Those are some of those little things. We always want to use photocopying for free. We are studying and we use the organizational papers and photocopying and the telephone. But there was a book where we used to have to record if you photocopied your own personal things or if you use the telephone for a personal call. And I remember always telling myself, be faithful in that little thing. And at times you'd be the only one at the end of the month who has to be deducted for having used the telephone for private things or photocopying for your individual things. But we need to train ourselves in being faithful in those little things so that when the bigger ethical dilemmas come, we are able to conquer them. As corporate leaders, we are stewards of resources and we should manage them responsibly, ensuring transparency, and also in a way that we are not extravagant in our course. There is also the verse in Micah 6:8, where we are called as Christians to be just and fair. And we are told, the Lord has told you what is good, and this is what he requires of you, to do what is right, to love mercy, and to work humbly with Him. So how do we treat our clients? How do we treat our employees? We are called to be equitable in treatment of employees, giving fair wages, and being non-discriminatory. Of course, in Uganda, we do not have a minimum wage, and sometimes we do abuse because of that. We offer cheap labor, but also because of a scarcity of jobs. Sometimes we take advantage of the younger generation today who are desperate for jobs. We pay them so little for so much. But are we being ethical in what we are doing in that way? Ethical leadership also requires of us to be servant leaders. We are called to serve. And Mark 10:45 tells us, even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. So ethical leadership is about serving. That's what we are here for. And for Africa to manifest, there's a need for people who are there to serve, not people looking for what they can gain. And also, it calls for humility, prioritizing the well-being of others, not just our own well-being. It also calls for respect and for contracts and the promises we make. We are told in Ecclesiastes 5:4, when you make a vow to God, do not delay to fulfill it. Many times we do not honor our agreements, and that causes loss of trust. And also, we do not pay in time or complete. We want to pay small amounts, yet we agree differently. We are also called to defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. So I mentioned earlier about handling conflict of interest. Issues which cause conflict of interest will always be there, but how do we handle them when they come about? Do we push them under the carpet and pretend there's nothing? Then we are not being ethical. But we need to recognize when conflicts exist or they may arise, and to be able to declare, and that is to disclose, and also separate ourselves from the discussions and the decision that follows. Some front page tests for us as whether we are ethical leaders. Would we be comfortable if the decision we made makes headlines? Are we proud that, oh, I made that decision? Or would we want to hide, and you don't want the name to be said who was behind this decision or whether you are part of it? If we would like to hide, then perhaps we are not being ethical in our decisions. And the issue of stakeholders, equitable treatment of stakeholders. The stakeholders, as I said earlier, they include the owners, those are the shareholders, the internal staff, the internal clients who are the staff, the employees, or the suppliers, and also other people who may give us credit. Why ethical leadership matters? Ethical leadership matters because it builds trust. When we are ethical, people will trust us. It also boosts employee morale and will create a culture where people feel safe, valued, and motivated. It also helps organizations to avoid scandals and reputational damage and promotes responsible behavior at all levels. I was going to give a homework, but I will leave it out and give a final thought. The homework actually was given by a professor. I had something similar, but which ethical area are we going to work at as a leader as we prepare to manifest? But our final thought, ethical leadership isn't just about avoiding problems. It's about creating a culture where doing the right things becomes the foundation for sustainable success. So we need to aim at doing the right things for success. And also, in conclusion, I would like to say, as I said earlier, conflicts of interest are normal, and they can be managed effectively if we declare. Proper disclosure is always necessary for transparency, instead of hiding it under the carpet. And having clear processes that protect the organization and the individuals of the organization. Whenever there's ambiguity, then people will end up in any way. And also organizations need ethical codes of conduct, which should be reviewed periodically. That's what we need in our organizations, but review them periodically, and also having regular ethical discussions, even in our boards, to know whether the decisions we are making are ethical or they are not ethical, or how can we improve on being an ethical board. Even ethical training for the staff, for the senior managers, for boards, just so that we are on the same page on what do we mean by ethical leadership. Yeah, thank you so much. I think I'll end there for tonight.
Wow. Wow. Friends, let's clap. Let's see some emojis. How best can you clap in the message section? Thank you so much, Mrs. Priscilla. It's been amazing. One of the key things that has stood out for me is actually the front page test, where you have to ask yourself, would you be okay if the decision you've made in your organization would make headlines? Would that be okay with you? And I think it goes even beyond organizations. It goes even at a personal level, in all the different spheres and spaces in our lives, that all the different things we deal with, family, work. Would you be happy if what you're doing made headlines? Amazing. But I've also picked out that, it's not bad to declare conflict of interest. Yeah. What is bad is keeping quiet when you know a decision is being made and you're being considered, but the board doesn't know they're considering their fellow board member, And I think it happens quite a lot. Either it's your sister they are considering and you're happy, that's one of the things that also stands out. And I think it's quite a serious issue currently. Yeah. And also the other thing that stood out for me is how we should always consistently evaluate our motives and how important it is for us to know how people perceive us. As a leader, it's important to know how people perceive you. It's not that, this is me, this is what I do. That's also the other thing that stood out for me. And of course, the ethical the hotspots, sometimes we think we are working so hard and we ignore the other areas of our lives, like family, going home with a laptop, attending meetings Monday to Monday, that's something that also stood out for me as an ethical hotspot. Yeah, it's important that we balance what we are doing and keep in lines of accountability for all of those. And also the setting of unrealistic goals for our subordinates. I think everyone always likes pushing work. No one enjoys doing too much work. So um, that's a hotspot when you realize that you set targets that you even know you cannot achieve, but because of the pressure from above, you make your subordinates actually go through quite tedious targets because you're also under pressure. So that's a hotspot for an ethical leader. Amazing stuff. Thank you so much, Priscilla. I don't know if we have a question before we go back to the meeting, the general conference. I'm happy to take any question, and Priscilla is here to help in answering if you have any question. you just have a minute or so to share that, and then we'll go out of here. Anyone with a question, it is welcome. But Priscilla, thank you. Thank you. I love the research from Ernst and Young Integrity Report. Amazing how things are happening, and sometimes we don't take care to know actually some of the results from such researches. But for me, I am very challenged. The motive of my heart as a leader, it should be key. Yeah, not just doing things because of a position. So thank you so much, Priscilla. Thank you everyone that's been here. We just have one hand, and that's for Oloyojok. Please unmute and share, then we can go back to the share.
Yes, thank you so much, Elder, for blessing us with your wisdom. My question is, let us assume you have failed the ethical test, okay? You have done things that when it's put on the headline, it's not necessarily positive. How do you bounce back from such scenarios where you have failed the ethical test? Thank you.
Where I failed to do it?
Where you failed the ethical test. Let's
When
say
you
you
fail
come out
the
in the
ethical test,
headlines. Yes.
I think there is always the apology.
Yes.
I am sorry.
Mm.
I am sorry. I am sorry always has always quietened many things. But at times we are so defensive instead. And
Yeah.
we are looking for who to blame instead of taking the responsibility.
Mm.
And also even being able to go back even to your organization and say, I'm sorry, I think this was not a right decision. I think
Yes.
it's calls for humility as a leader to be able to say, no, I'm sorry. I think this was not right. Perhaps let's look for an alternative.
Mm.
So really it is the being able to say, no, I'm sorry, it was not a good test. No, it was not a
Mm.
good decision.
Mm.
Going back to accepting to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mrs. Priscilla. And I think you hinted on it when you were talking about traits of ethical leadership, where you talked about accountability. And one of the areas being able to own mistakes and not defend mistakes or transfer blame. Yeah, so that answers the question entirely. And humility, I think, for me is the key there, because it's not easy to accept, but that's the right thing to do. Yeah, so thank you very much, friends. Thank you so much. You've been an amazing team. Thank you so much for this session. Thank you so much, Priscilla. We picked a lot, a lot, a lot. Thank you. So let's go back to the meeting, the general conference, and we finish our next session. Thank you.